It was the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. Jasmine Crockett didn't need to shout. She let the stillness do the cutting. On a sleek panel show meant to dazzle, she delivered a line so surgical it tore through 5 years of stage perfection. One sentence. That's all it took to send Melania Trump's ghost of a public image hurtling into headlines without her name even spoken. No aggression, just precision. She didn't attack, she indicted. And the nation flinched. The question had been simple. Should political spouses reflect the values of the roles they inherit? Crockett leaned in like a prosecutor stepping into the light. You can't cherry pick the job, she said. You don't get the bouquet without the burial, the crown without the thorns. The words dropped like cold steel. The studio air froze. Her gaze didn't scan the room. It drilled through the lens into the homes of millions. Where was visibility? She asked. When children screamed behind chain-link fences. When mothers cried out for mercy, there was no reply. Just the memory of a green jacket and the silence that roared louder than any answer. Production halted. A headset crackled. A black screen took over. 8 seconds. That's how long the nation stared at nothing, holding its breath. No scandal, no foul language. Just a broadcast system overwhelmed by the weight of unfiltered honesty. When the image returned, the damage was done. In the studio, no one spoke. No applause, no defenses. Jasmine Crockett sat center frame, composed, defiant. Her words still hanging in the air. She hadn't mentioned Melania Trump by name, but she didn't need to. The message landed like a gavel. Jasmine turned a policy question into a national moment of reckoning. She used precision instead of accusation. And across the country, the echo was felt, even behind the guarded gates of Mar-a-Lago. There, Melania Trump watched, alone, her expression unreadable. The East Parlor, decorated to impress, now felt like a holding room. She sat rigid, eyes fixed on the screen. No sound, but the impact was crystal clear. Jasmine Crockett had called out her absence, and the world was waiting for an answer. The video had already gone viral. The line, clear, sharp, and soaked in subtext, was everywhere. Jasmine Crockett hadn't screamed. She hadn't ranted. She hadn't needed to. The impact was nuclear, and Melania Trump knew it. She hadn't responded. She hadn't even spoken, but now her silence was trending. Inside her ornate room, Melania sat unmoving, her phone humming every few seconds with new alerts. Old colleagues, media figures, family across oceans, everyone demanding a reaction, but she gave them nothing. Still as marble, flawless, but deeply unsettled. It didn't feel fair. She hadn't picked this battle, but now somehow she was losing it. Across from her, Helena held a transcript, tight, folded, unofficial. Just one line, she said. Just something. Melania's reply was cool, flat. I don't explain myself every time someone throws a stone. Helena didn't back off. This isn't a stone. Melania rose. The drapes parted slightly. The sky beyond was perfect, indifferent. Her voice cracked without raising. Say something, and they twist it. Say nothing, and I'm ice. So what do they want? An apology for existing? No matter how hard Melania tried, they always painted her as the villain. Helena placed the papers down, sinking into the chair as if the world had suddenly grown too heavy. Maybe this wasn't about right or wrong anymore. Maybe it was just about being seen, about making them notice. Melania let out a deep breath, slow and drained. She turned from the window, folding her arms like she was trying to keep herself from breaking. I never wanted attention, she murmured, her voice full of quiet frustration. I wanted to protect my son. I wanted peace, but he made sure that didn't happen. And now they want me to answer for it. Her words hit hard, a sharp truth in the air. She met Helena's eyes. A number I won't say a word. I don't need to fight an enemy that doesn't even exist. But outside that room, the pressure was mounting. In the West Wing, aides were working in hushed voices, trying to find a way out. One had already written 3 different statements, each one more desperate than the last. Another was speaking urgently on the phone. If she doesn't respond by tonight, she'll lose control of the narrative. Her silence, once a calculated act, was now being spun into something else. The media's tone was shifting. Crockett speaks. Will Melania? The question echoed. Donors were starting to panic. Some demanded an answer. Others warned against it. It felt like a trap. And there, at the heart of it all, stood Melania, a woman who had built her life on grace and quiet strength, now crushed under the weight of it. Not because she was wrong, but because in this world, silence was the greatest sin. While Melania lingered behind cold marble walls, gripping tightly to the last threads of her silence, the world outside had already caught fire. Not in whispers, but in roaring flame. Tweet by tweet, clip by clip. The nation didn't wait for a press release. It combusted with truth. Someone had finally said it, the unspoken thing everyone had been choking on. It began with a spark, a 22-second clip, shaky and raw, posted by a college sophomore in Atlanta. The caption said it all. She didn't lie. She didn't even flinch. The flame leapt platforms in seconds, from TikTok to X, then full-screened on YouTube by a political streamer who christened it the most brutally honest takedown of First Lady culture ever caught on camera. The algorithm didn't just catch it, it devoured it whole. Hashtags ignited across the grid, pulsing like a heartbeat in crisis. Be best, but silent surged first. Then came Crockett and silence. And next, a mocking chorus. She speak like Jasmine. Decorate, but don't defend. It spilled into cafes, classrooms, subway stations. Millions of eyes locked on Jasmine Crockett, her lips steady, her words sharp, saying what people had only dared to mutter behind closed doors. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even blink, and somehow the world held its breath and finally heard her. By midday, fan accounts from Brazil to Berlin had translated the clip into 6 languages. TikTokers laid her voice over protest footage. Immigrant children weeping in cages, even slow-mo reels of Melania stepping off Air Force One in her infamous green jacket. Reddit crowned it instantly. A post titled this is what leadership looks like. Soared to the top of r/politics. Instagram influencers, normally preaching the gospel of exfoliation and oat milk, were quoting Jasmine verbatim. You can't pick the flowers and ignore the roots. You can't claim kindness and choose silence. People weren't just reposting. They were feeling it. It struck a nerve buried deep. In Austin, a high school history teacher halted class, cast the video on the projector, and let the silence speak after. In New York, shelter organizers paused a food drive to watch, then discuss. In Kansas City, a veteran posted a solemn selfie. I didn't vote for her. While Melania clung to marble stillness, the world was already on fire. Not from scandal, no. This was something else, an uprising, a pulse. It crackled through feeds and screens, not whispered, but shouted, one raw clip at a time. No filters, no spin, just Jasmine, standing her ground, slicing through silence with precision. A 22-second video, that's all it took, posted by a college sophomore with Wi-Fi and nerve. She didn't lie, she didn't even flinch, read the caption. The internet detonated. Within minutes, TikTok lit up. X exploded. YouTube locked in. A political streamer called it the most savage takedown of First Lady culture in modern history. Hashtags didn't just trend, they marched. Be best, but silent. Crockett and silence. She speak like Jasmine, and the cruelest of them all, decorate, don't defend. Screens lit up in coffee shops, classrooms, subways. Millions watched Jasmine mid-sentence, unmoved, unafraid. She didn't yell. She didn't blink. She just held steady, and the world listened. By noon, her words were dubbed in 6 languages. Protest footage, detention center clips, even slow-mo shots of Melania in that green jacket got the remix treatment. Reddit crowned her. Instagram skincare gurus quoted her. "You can't pick the flowers and ignore the roots," they wrote, sipping matcha with rebellion in their eyes. This wasn't a trend, it was a reckoning. "I'd fight for her," someone posted. But it wasn't just hype. It was a release, a collective scream. Women who were told to smile, sit still, stay soft, now watched one of their own rip the script to shreds. Jasmine didn't plead. She didn't cry. She cut with surgical truth. And in the silence that followed, no fear, just recognition. Conservative women, ones who'd been loyal but uneasy, shared it quietly in private threads. "This isn't about left or right," one wrote. "It's about showing up versus checking out." Even Republican staffers started liking the video from burner accounts. Journalists whispered, "This one feels different." One morning, Anchor broke script. "Say what you will," he said, "but that was the truth. And the truth doesn't flinch." Backstage, the control room froze. But the biggest shift came from folks who didn't even care about politics. A factory worker embroidered Jasmine's quote into a jacket for his daughter. A single mom sobbed into her phone. "I stayed quiet too long," she said. "Not anymore." It wasn't just reposts. It was memory. Trauma resurfaced. Every bite of the tongue. Every time they shrank to survive. Now they were watching Jasmine Crockett with fire in her eyes, and finally, they felt something rise. Permission to speak, to disrupt, to say that the silence, no matter how pretty, was never protection. It was compliance. Before sunset, the clip crossed 10 million views, then 11, then 12, then 15. This wasn't a speech. It was a fuse. Well, it finally happened. The First Lady fairy tale, glossy, graceful, and gorgeously mute, got dragged into the group chat. Somewhere between a college dorm and a suburban soccer van, people started asking, wait a second, why did we think silence was classy? Why was standing next to power while saying nothing the gold standard? Turns out Jasmine Crockett had questions too, and instead of tweeting about it, she delivered a monologue sharp enough to slice through decades of decorative delusion. She didn't name names, didn't have to. She just cracked the porcelain doll shell. So Melania wasn't the only target. It was the whole aesthetic of the quietly suffering, perfectly poised spouse. And as the cracks deepened, so did the questions. If silence is a virtue, what the hell do we call complicity? Somewhere in Chicago, the revolution got a soundtrack, a projected clip, a new chant. Not angry, not messy, just perfectly memeable. You want the praise, take the pressure. You want the title, carry the weight. From TikTok teens to retired nurses with Facebook game addictions, the gospel spread. Not just quoted, repeated, lived, internalized. The world was either screaming or screenshotting. Meanwhile, in an office that could double as a fire hazard, one Theo Padron, a caffeine-addled journalism goblin, hit the jackpot. 4th floor walk-up. Smelled like burnout and betrayal. He was knee-deep in speech drafts when he stumbled across an archive nobody meant to preserve. Mostly fluff. Inspirational nonsense and ghost-written napkin scribbles. But in there, a heartbeat. A hidden truth with teeth. In a shocking turn of events, a draft statement from the First Lady expressing opposition to child separation policies was discovered with a handwritten note. Do not send. He won't allow it. Sources say the note was penned with the same fervor as a toddler denied dessert. Experts are baffled. It's like finding out your cat wrote a novel, but the dog ate it, said one analyst. The White House has neither confirmed nor denied the existence of the note, but insiders suggest it's being considered for the next season of The Crown. Stay tuned as we uncover more about this paper trail of intrigue. In the annals of a nation's history, amidst the chronicles of power and policy, there lay a parchment, a draft, inscribed with the earnest plea of a First Lady. She decried the separation of children from their kin, branding it a cruelty unbecoming of the land's ideals. Yet, as the ink dried, a shadow loomed. A hand, unseen but potent, etched a decree. Do not send. He won't allow it. Thus, the message was buried, the voice stifled. But truths, like seeds, lie dormant only to awaken. And when they do, they shake the very foundations of silence. She wrote, "Silence is not elegance. It is abandonment. A call for justice swiftly silenced." The margin note, delete. Compassion redacted. In the wake of national unrest following George Floyd's death, a draft statement from First Lady Melania Trump surfaced, revealing a candid acknowledgement of the pain felt across the country. The document, dated early June 2020, began with a poignant line, "In times of deep pain, silence is not elegance. It is abandonment." This unfiltered expression stood in stark contrast to the administration's public stance at the time. The draft addressed the necessity of listening to Black communities with humility and recognized the First Lady's platform as a means to advocate for justice. However, annotations from an internal communications director labeled the content as too strong, too political, concluding with a directive to delete. This revelation highlights internal conflicts within the White House regarding responses to social justice movements. In a modest Dallas kitchen, Representative Jasmine Crockett recorded a candid message addressing criticisms of her recent statements. Without a script or formal setting, she spoke directly to the camera, challenging the notion that her remarks had crossed a line. "I keep hearing that I went too far," she began, her tone measured. "But nobody wants to talk about the line we already crossed the moment kids were crying in cages, and no one with power said a damn thing." Crockett drew parallels between the silencing of powerful figures and everyday individuals, referencing her mother's resilience as a school nurse during the COVID-19 pandemic. Her message underscored a broader commentary on systemic issues and the importance of speaking out against injustice. The kitchen was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Jasmine Crockett placed her phone against a chipped ceramic mug, the screen reflecting her determined gaze. She took a deep breath, the overhead light flickering momentarily. No notes, no rehearsals, just her voice, raw and unfiltered. "I keep hearing that I went too far," she began, addressing the unseen audience. Her words painted a vivid picture of children in cages, a First Lady silenced, and a mother who stood resilient amidst adversity. In that moment, Jasmine wasn't just speaking for herself. She was giving voice to the unheard, challenging the status quo with unwavering conviction. In Jasmine Crockett's kitchen, Night Jasmine stands before her phone, recording. "Jasmine, I keep hearing that I went too far, that I should have chosen my words more carefully." She pauses, eyes intense. "Jasmine, but nobody talks about the line we crossed when kids were crying in cages and no one with power said a damn thing." The video ends. The screen fades to black. The Mar-a-Lago. Melania's study, night. Melania sits alone, watching Jasmine's video. She picks up the phone and dials. Int, Jasmine's apartment, night. Jasmine's phone rings. She answers. "Jasmine. Hello? Melania. This is Melania Trump." Jasmine sits up, alert. "Jasmine, I assume you've seen the video." "Melania, I have. That's why I'm calling." Silence. Melania. "I don't hate you, Congresswoman. I hate the truth you said out loud." Jasmine sat, the weight of her words palpable in the air. "I didn't say it to hurt you," she said, the cadence of her voice calm but resolute. "I said it because it was real, because some of us don't get to sit in silence and still be safe. On the other end of the line, Melania's breath wavered. You said I disappeared, that I only showed up for photo ops, that I chose image over responsibility. Jasmine, without hesitation, cut in. I didn't name you, but if the shoe fits, maybe it's time to stop blaming the mirror. There was a quiet tension between them, the sound of Melania pacing, her bare feet brushing against the floor. Then finally, Melania spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I wanted to speak. There were drafts, words I wrote. Jasmine's voice dropped, cutting through the stillness like a knife. How many women paid for that silence? How many daughters, mothers, little girls saw you standing next to cruelty and thought kindness was just decoration? The phone line crackled with the weight of a moment unspoken. Then Melania's voice came through, full of recognition and regret. You embarrassed me. Not because you lied, but because you said what I couldn't. Jasmine's gaze never wavered. I don't need you to agree with me. I just need you to understand why silence felt like betrayal. Melania's reply was almost a confession. I wasn't strong enough. Jasmine's voice was steady and strong. Strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about choosing to speak even when you are. There was another silence, heavier than the last. Melania's voice finally came, quieter now, as if acknowledging the depth of their conversation. I didn't call to fix this. I just wanted to hear it from you. Unfiltered Jasmine let her words settle in the air, unflinching. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if gathering strength from the quiet. Then hear this, she said, the words sharp and deliberate. It was never just about you. It's about a system that teaches women to smile through pain, that makes wealth look like grace and truth look like rage. The phone call didn't wrap up with forgiveness or false unity. There were no sugar-coated words, no attempts to smooth over the rawness of the moment. Just two women facing the aftermath of their choices, both caught in a conversation neither had anticipated, but both had needed. When Jasmine hung up, there was no sense of victory. There was only the hard, unrelenting ache of truth, a blend of justice and sorrow. Not victory, a reckoning. If anyone had overheard that call, they wouldn't have heard a fight. They would have heard two women refusing to back down. The conversation didn't end in peace, but it created a fracture in something that needed to be broken. And sometimes it only takes one crack for the light to break through. What happened next wasn't planned. Some truths are too heavy to carry alone. The Columbus Community Center wasn't made for national moments. It had peeling paint, buzzing lights, and the lingering smell of old coffee. But that morning, it felt like something bigger than its modest walls could hold. Nearly 200 people were there. Teachers, nurses, students, retired women who had brought their own chairs just in case the plastic ones didn't hold up. Jasmine. The back doors opened slowly, unnoticed at first. She didn't stand out, not with her plain gray coat that fell over her knees like a shadow. There was no entourage, no gleaming smile, no recognition. Just a woman walking without the usual fanfare. Then she stepped into the light, and everything in the room shifted. The air grew heavy, charged. Jasmine stopped mid-sentence, instinctively turning her gaze to the door. The room didn't erupt, but it moved, a ripple of recognition spreading. People rose to their feet, not for applause, but because they sensed the weight of the moment. They couldn't remain seated. They wouldn't. Melania Trump walked down the aisle, her face set, not meeting anyone's eyes, but not avoiding them either. She carried something with her, a weight too heavy to carry in silence anymore. Jasmine stood firm, her hands gripping the podium. Her body wasn't rigid with anger, but with something else, preparedness. A staffer moved to intercept Melania, unsure of what was happening, but Jasmine simply shook her head. A silent order. Let her through. A second microphone was handed to Melania. She didn't approach the stage like a guest, but like someone who had returned to a place they never thought they'd return to. For several seconds, the silence was unbearable, thick, and then she spoke. For years, Melania's voice trembled. I chose silence. I chose to smile when I was suffocating. I chose to pretend, to wait for the moment that never came. She paused, her hand shaking as she gripped the microphone tighter. But today, I choose truth. It started quietly, a single clap, tentative, then another and another. It wasn't thunderous. It wasn't a burst of applause. It gathered like a storm, slow and steady. Jasmine remained unmoving, her gaze unwavering. She hadn't moved. Jasmine's gaze remained steady on Melania, not in opposition nor in alliance, but simply as a witness. And as Melania spoke, her voice gathered strength, a quiet force. You may never forgive my silence, and that's fair. I'm not asking you to, but I didn't come here to rewrite the past. I came because I've allowed others to speak for me for too long, and I've paid the price for it, silently, alone. Her gaze shifted toward Jasmine. What you said stung. It hurt, but it was true. I wasn't erased by you. I was erased long before. And for once, I want to show up. Not for photos, not for validation, but for the truth. Jasmine didn't speak. She simply placed her hand, slow and deliberate, on the podium next to Melania's. They didn't embrace. They didn't pose for cameras. But in that moment, the silence between them spoke volumes. Two women, once worlds apart, now standing together, not in agreement, but in defiance of the silence that had kept them apart. For a long moment, the room was still. It wasn't a moment of applause. It was a quiet, powerful shift. Two women standing side by side, unflinching. The photograph that captured that moment spread rapidly, faster than any soundbite could. It wasn't just a picture. It was a rupture, a moment that couldn't be ignored. By morning, the image was everywhere, on front pages, Instagram stories, cable news, and blogs. Jasmine, resolute in her dark blazer, and Melania, solemn in her gray coat, standing side by side. No smiles, no scripted gestures, just two women standing for truth, in a way the world had never seen before, and the headlines reflected that. It didn't take long for the world to respond. The New York Times called it a new language between opposites, a symbolic shift in the way we communicate across divides. Politico called it a transition from firestorm to fault line, but it was the Atlantic that framed it in history. A handshake between candor and redemption, they said. The response was immediate, not just in social media shares, but in real human expressions, voice memos, handwritten letters, classroom debates, and even sermons. A retired librarian from Iowa posted a Facebook message at 6:12 a.m. reading, I'm 76, I've waited a lifetime to see two women stand in truth without one being erased. A college senior from Spelman tweeted, this is the kind of womanhood I was raised for. Not perfection, just courage. The reaction wasn't outrage, but relief. A collective exhale. It was as if millions of people, unconsciously holding their breath, finally felt safe to breathe again. Then the former First Lady stepped into the spotlight. Michelle Obama, with characteristic grace, broke the silence. She didn't speak. She didn't give a press tour. She simply posted a black and white photo from 2009 standing behind the Resolute desk while others debated a policy she chose not to engage with. Her caption, I remember. It went viral in 20 minutes. Next, Hillary Clinton shared a long-form op-ed, When Your Voice Cost You. She recounted the early 90s when she was criticized for being too visible, too outspoken, too unlikable. I wasn't trying to dominate the room, she wrote. I just refused to disappear into it. Even Laura Bush, usually quiet, released a rare message. Even in silence, we feel the weight of what we cannot say. Sometimes the cost of being First Lady is not dignity, it's your voice. What followed wasn't just a media frenzy. It was a movement built not on political divisions, but on a shared experience of silence finally breaking. On TikTok, Gen Z creators remixed Jasmine's kitchen video with Melania's speech, creating a viral campaign called Rashi's Speak Even If You Shake. On campuses from Ohio State to UCLA, women gathered in what were called voice circles, where they stood together and spoke the truths they'd buried for too long. It was a moment without cameras, without the usual spotlight. Journalists tried to label it post-political feminism. But for the women living through it, it wasn't just a phase. It was essential. It was the first time in a long while that women weren't just being seen, they were being heard truly and deeply. They weren't asking to be liked or applauded anymore. They were demanding to be heard. And at the center of it all was Jasmine Crockett, the unintentional architect of this movement. She didn't win debates or write headlines. She simply refused to accept a world that treated silence as a virtue. She didn't go on talk shows or hold press conferences. She just kept moving, from town halls to youth centers to legal clinics. Her voice remained steady and resolute, the same one that had once cut through the quiet kitchen. It was direct and unapologetic, but now it was different. When Jasmine walked into a room, the room shifted. Teachers greeted her with tears in their eyes. Girls in hoodies held their notebooks, waiting hours just to say thank you. Her critics, once quick to dismiss her as too emotional or too divisive, began to rethink their stance. She was no longer just the woman calling out silence. She was the woman turning it into something loud, something undeniable. The frenzy had subsided, but the movement had only gained strength. Inside the packed ballroom of Akron Civic Hall, the air was thick with anticipation, ready for something big to happen. The chandeliers above flickered with a quiet hum, casting fragmented light across the room. And when Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the crowd. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence spoke volumes. She wore no blazer, just a simple charcoal dress and a lapel pin, an open mouth, the symbol of the voice that would not be silenced. The symbol on Jasmine's lapel, the open mouth, was a silent declaration that rang out louder than any words. The room was packed. Teachers, machinists, students, grandmothers, all of them holding their folded programs like precious secrets. 2 sign language interpreters stood nearby, ready to mirror her every move, poised for action. At the back, a sea of journalists crowded on a narrow platform, cameras focused on the podium, unbranded. No logos. Jasmine made sure of it. Truth didn't need a brand. The stage was stripped down to its raw bones, a single mic, a black riser, no distractions, no pretensions, just the truth. The audience had come expecting a firestorm, the kind that had filled their feeds for weeks. But Jasmine gave them something different. Silence. She stretched it out, letting it hang in the air, and with one raised hand the room went still. Then, in a voice that cut through the tension, she said, "Before you leave here tonight, I want you to recognize the sound of a voice that is free. Free from apology, free from permission, free from the silence we mistake for grace." The crowd leaned in, and Jasmine's next words came like a bolt of lightning. "Melania is not my enemy. She is my mirror." And both of us were asked to vanish in 2 different languages. A collective breath rose from the crowd, swelling in the air like a tide that couldn't be stopped. Jasmine moved across the stage, her heels clicking with authority. She described 2 languages, velvet, the soft command to be quiet and smile, spoken in mansions and motorcades, and steel, the harsh, be quiet or else, spoken in courtrooms and parking lots. Each sentence hit like a drumbeat, shaking the room with its truth. Women in the aisles nodded, arms folded, holding tight to the years of silence that were finally being broken. Jasmine's gaze swept over the upper mezzanine, locking eyes with the men who'd shown up out of curiosity and were now stone-faced, jaws clenched, absorbing every word without any shield to hide behind. "I didn't come here to crucify a former First Lady," Jasmine's voice rang out, rising with power. "I came to crucify the myth that silence is civility, that vanishing is virtue, and that a woman's voice is only a weapon when it challenges the powerful." The room erupted into applause, but Jasmine silenced it with a single decisive motion of her hand. She had more to say. The applause died down, the tension thickening as the crowd awaited her next words. Jasmine began recounting a story the cameras didn't capture. The night her mother came home after a grueling 12-hour shift, shoes soaked in disinfectant, and admitted she'd been reprimanded for asking the hospital to provide discharge instructions in Spanish. The crowd leaned in, the older women in the front gripping each other's sleeves, preparing for the blow they had long feared. Jasmine revealed that her mother had chosen silence, not because she wanted to, but because speaking up would have risked everything: her job, their future, and Jasmine's dreams of education. That silence had wrapped around their lives like ivy, strangling their chance to breathe free. "Silence paid our bill," Jasmine said, her voice cracking under the weight of the confession. "But it charged us interest in regret." Heads bowed and some hands covered mouths, while the interpreter's hands moved swiftly, turning the anguish into an almost fiery language of motion. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat, but she pressed on. "So when I say Melania is my mirror, I do not absolve her. I indict the system that handed us all a muzzle and called it jewelry." The metaphor sparked something, lighting a fire within the crowd. A row of teenagers in hoodies stood, the room seeming to tilt beneath them. Jasmine allowed the applause to rise, but only for 3 beats before cutting it off. If the system can mute a woman of privilege and one of grit, then silence isn't just a habit, it's an economy. The truth rang out, clear and sharp, like an alarm that couldn't be ignored. The cameramen exchanged looks, scripts obsolete. The lights above intensified, but it wasn't the lights themselves. It was the reflection of the audience's tears, glowing back at Jasmine. At that moment, a retired teacher from the 15th row rose to her feet, silver hair pinned into a tight bun, tears streaming down her face, her voice cracked but clear. "You make me wish I had spoken 30 years sooner." Jasmine moved, not missing a beat, stepping toward the edge of the stage, her hands open. "We can't rewrite yesterday," she said, "but we can refuse to leave today unwritten." The teacher's shoulders buckled under the weight of a sob, one she tried to hold back. Strangers on either side reached out, pulling her into an embrace that spanned across generations. Reporters scribbled furiously, but their pens seemed too small for what was unfolding before them. Cameras fogged as the weight of the moment pressed in. Jasmine let the silence expand, the space between words filled with grief, resolve, and something unspoken. She looked up to the balcony, where latecomers packed the railings. "Some of us carry silence like heirloom china," she said, the words sharp and quiet, passed down from mothers who believed that shattered dreams were louder than shattered plates. Jasmine softened her voice to a near whisper. "But an heirloom can be broken on purpose, so no daughter has to carry its weight." The words hit the room like a tidal wave, shock turning into recognition, and then an eruption of applause that shook the air. Jasmine didn't smile. She closed her eyes, inhaling before delivering the final words that would carry across the world. "It is never too late to raise your voice, and it is never too late to learn how to listen." The crowd erupted, standing as one, tears falling without shame, strangers locking in fierce embraces. Flashbulbs captured the rawness, faces frozen in moments of vulnerability in transformation. Jasmine stepped back from the microphone, letting the noise wash over her. Her eyes shimmered, unbroken. Her shoulders squared as if she had always belonged to this moment, and the moment belonged to history. In the chaos of sound, the teacher's voice rose again, laughter threading through the tears. Jasmine nodded, a silent promise between them. The cameras zoomed out, framing the collective power. Fists raised, tears streaking faces, voices joined. The banner above, Women in Power. Jasmine didn't wave or bow. She placed one hand over her heart, a gesture saying, "I hear you." And for the first time in a long, long time, the nation watching knew that she did. What do we do with truth once it finally breaks its chains? The question pulses in the background, always there, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. The first lesson is clear. Silence is a weapon, and like all weapons, it leaves no visible wounds. That's why the world often mistakes it for peace. Jasmine Crockett learned this in the courtroom, where her objections were brushed off as dramatic, while Melania Trump felt it in the ballrooms, where her quiet compliance was seen as grace. Two women, standing on opposite ends of power, both wounded by the same weapon. One bruise visible for all to see, the other hidden away, unseen. Injustice thrives on the difference. Hoping will focus on comparing scars instead of naming the hand that struck both. When Jasmine finally tore the veil off, she forced the nation to see the polished silence we all admire is bought with someone else's suffocation. Power is dangerous, like radioactive material. Handle it in silence, and it slowly seeps into everything. Confront it loudly, and it detonates, making the fallout impossible to ignore. Speaking out costs something, but silence accrues interest, and it always comes for its payment. In a world that thrives on female compliance, silence isn't just a setting, it's a shackle. The morale that runs through Akron is clear. The debt of silence will bankrupt you, even if the world calls it grace. The second lesson is loud and unavoidable, like the wail of a siren. Truth will always find a way, and sometimes that truth doesn't come from where we expect. Theo Padron, a cub reporter with cracked shoes and a soul worn thin, was the messenger who turned the world upside down. His story reminds us that dismantling injustice doesn't happen on marble steps. It begins in small, cluttered offices in the hands of the unnoticed. Theo shattered the myth that small people can't move big stones. Each of us holds a fragment of the story that could rewrite everything. The question isn't whether you can carry it, it's whether you're brave enough to drop it at the nation's feet. Moral courage doesn't come with a microphone. It's built in the quiet spaces, under the constant pressure of deadlines that never offer overtime. When courage strikes injustice, it doesn't just echo, it cracks open the foundation. The lesson is both painful and freeing. Silence doesn't shield you, it makes you complicit. Your voice doesn't protect you, it makes you indispensable. History is not written by towering figures, but by countless small efforts, each one a hammer striking the same wall until light pours through. The Akron stage taught us that redemption is not a reward, it's a burden. It's the weight you carry step by step after your apology. Melania's walk down that aisle was short in physical distance, but its consequences were felt forever. Each heel strike was a reminder of years of silence, and now the price was due. Her admission, "I chose safety," wasn't absolution, it was an indictment of a culture that rewards disappearing and punishes speaking out. Redemption is heavy because it drags the ghosts of every moment you chose silence while injustice stood firm. To bear it, you must name every ghost. That's why the room wept. They weren't applauding a perfect change. They were watching truth dismantle the myth that elegance equals virtue. The moral is direct. Forgiveness is never free. It's paid in the currency of the next brave sentence. If you want the applause, you bear the weight. If you crave the platform, you take on the burden. Anything less is a mask. True redemption is a daily choice to endure discomfort so that someone else can finally breathe. The crowd in Akron understood that discomfort, and in understanding, they unlocked their own rebellions. Injustice is not an isolated incident. It's an ecosystem. If you expose one lie, the entire structure of deceit starts to rot. Jasmine's video pulled one silent first lady into the light, but it shook boardrooms, classrooms, and living rooms because people recognized their own silence in hers. When Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Laura Bush spoke out after years of silence, they weren't just commiserating, they were exposing the systemic vines that choke every position of power. Injustice hides behind every weakest link, but once revealed, the whole chain snaps. Expose one truth ruthlessly, and fractures appear, allowing empathy to weaken the entire structure. That's why the Akron speech felt like an earthquake. Aftershocks rippled through laundromats, subway cars, and nursing shifts, places where power rarely visits. Every story that followed carried the same message. If she can stand up and speak, what's my excuse? A movement becomes unstoppable the moment it stops begging for permission and starts building its own table. Post-political feminism didn't need legal documents. It was formed in hashtags, sidewalk chalk, and spontaneous circles in dorms. The moment women realized they didn't need permission to stand, the entire structure of permission began to crumble. Jasmine didn't crown herself the leader. The crowd did, not with titles, but with the expectation that she would keep smashing the ceilings she had already cracked. Power doesn't give up willingly. It has to be dismantled, piece by piece, myth by myth. If you're waiting for an invitation to that revolution, you'll end up dying in the waiting room of respectability. Akron taught us that leadership isn't about charisma. It's about showing up when it's hardest. It's about risking everything, your reputation, your comfort, your peace, for the sake of truth. Jasmine's rise from critic to catalyst shows us exactly that. Momentum belongs to those who show up after the cameras leave. Sleeves rolled, ready to clean up the broken glass they helped shatter. Within 48 hours of Akron, the media tried to label Jasmine's speech as divisive theatrics. They called Melania's statement a strategic rebrand. But narrative parasites can't survive without hosts, and for once, the host refused to feed them. Social media exploded with real stories, drowning out the cynicism with lived experiences. The truth is tactical. You can't outrun a lie, but you can starve it by filling the air with undeniable truths. Every retweet, every conversation, every voice added fuel to the truth's fire, moving it faster than the spin could dilute it. The failure of imagination is the last refuge of oppression. Akron forced us to imagine a world where a first lady and a firebrand could unite despite their differences. Once you imagine that world, you can't unsee it. The counterstrike against injustice is clarity, and once that clarity spreads, it's a fire that no system can contain. The final question is one disguised as an invitation. What will you say before the silence comes for you? Injustice is already drafting new scripts, finding new ways to dress silence as sophistication. But Akron gave you the countermeasure. Truth spoken aloud over and over until the lie no longer has an echo. You don't need a podium. You need purpose. You don't need millions of followers. You need one sentence that shakes complacency. You don't need permission. You need breath, and you already have that. Every injustice hopes you'll forget the heat in your chest, the tremor, the rising urge to shout louder. If you remember nothing else, remember that feeling. It's a fuse waiting for your spark. If you ever doubt your voice, think of the worn shoes of a rookie reporter or the cracked voice of a retired teacher. Proof that the smallest stones start the biggest avalanches. The credits may roll, but real life doesn't end until you stand and speak. Jasmine's final words echo in the dark, not to comfort, but as a command. It's never too late to raise your voice. It's never too late to listen. Whatever you do next, whisper it, shout it, sing it. Don't let silence write your story. Thank you for standing with us on this journey toward justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss what's next. Leave a comment below and tell us what part of this story moved you most. Together, our voices make a difference.